Recently, while going through some old VHS videotapes, I found the following video from the 1983 Governor's Conference on the Handicapped. Keep in mind this video is nearly 40 years old. The video quality and some of the terminology used is very much out of date.
In preparing for his memorial service, some very fine tributes came forth, and I would like to zero in on three. On Sunday morning, a number of weeks ago, as I was preparing for my church service, conscience of the Senate. And these things, besides being loyal husband and father and devoted Christian. You know, when you leave this life, having lived a life in this one, I don't think you can have better tributes than those. I think it's fitting then that a life lived like that comes close to one that's mentioned in the Holy Bible, where it tells us that we are to get close to the handicapped. Here's how it says it. When you give a feast, do not invite your friends, your brothers, your kinsmen, or your rich neighbors, lest they invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, that means get involved with it. When you give a feast, invite the poor, the lame, the maimed, and the blind. They will not be able to repay you, but you will be blessed in the resurrection. And I think now to open this, if we would, as part of our invocation, do exactly what Indianapolis Star called for that day. May Providence send us more legislators like him, and that doesn't just mean immediately, but down through the years as we need people in government. We bow our heads and pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for the life of a good legislator. And we pray that you would continue to bless our country in its freedom, its religious freedom, its freedom of speech, its freedom of vote, its freedom of the exercise to live and go about in this country, seeking after all those good things and benefits which mankind may have. We ask your blessing, give thanks for this our native land, and we pray that you would grant us such people in government and such good citizens to follow their leadership, so that we may live in peace, so that we may enjoy the fruits of our labor, so that we may enjoy the fruits of our land, so that we may help one another, be of service to one another in all our doing, and thereby please you, Almighty God, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Greetings to all of you as you start this important conference, one which is, I think, number 22, is it not? And that is an indication of how far back the state of Indiana has seriously dealt with opportunities for those of its citizens who certainly are entitled to better opportunities. I like to think of the programs that now prevail as a matter of course, accepted, were entirely unheard of or brand new 22 years ago. And incidentally, that was not all that far removed from the time when Charlie Bosma first arrived on the scene in the Indiana House of Representatives as a brand new member of the Indiana General Assembly. So it might be said that his career as a member of the General Assembly parallels that of the growth and importance of this organization and the annual meetings and the work that has resulted from it to assure the fact that the handicapped do have opportunities obviously not have been theirs. I do want to thank you for inviting me to be on deck here for this occasion and to say a few words about those things which I think are important to be included in the thinking of everyone, not just the people in this conference, but people generally, as to that those two words that so easily fall from people's lips, equal opportunity, but which in many instances are so difficult for us to find ways by which to come by, particularly as it may relate to those who have suffered some handicap, but who have an opportunity as a result of that in a different way today than they may have had in the past. And it's important that we make sure that that continue and is strengthened and added to. I like to point, as I make visitations around and various of my responsibilities and duties, to the fact that society is undergoing unbelievable change at this point. We see it about us, and it's coming at us in such varying different ways that many of us almost fail to recognize that it is happening. We talk about a technological age, we talk about high tech, we talk about the information age and things of that kind. All of which means that in advanced technology, we must also find new opportunities for employment, for participation, for full involvement of all of our citizens. It also means that there is going to be a lot of innovation in therapy for the human being. Therapy in a whole lot of ways for a recuperation of the normal sort of a situation that one finds oneself in as a result of an operation or something of that kind, but more particularly, let's say, in terms of those that are more permanently disabled. It's going to come about in recreation and in the general quality of life for all of our citizens. I think it's important that we make sure that this technological age that we're experiencing focuses on the quality of life, the opportunities for the handicapped citizens, of whom there are so many, today, that are able to be full, participating citizens as a result of the fact that society in the last many years has reached out to make that possible. If all of us are to benefit from this technological progress that takes place, people must know what is available, must know what exists, where it's available. And in that way, they can take advantage of it in their own lives. I was struck with this just recently attending the Midwest Governors Association meeting in Lawrence, Kansas, early part of this week, where there was discussion of education and training. We have so much adopted special education as a part of education that we scarcely think of it anymore. Except that from time to time, as I visit schools, and I will be visiting one later this morning and over the noon hour, I encounter special education in process. And it is a wonder to behold that this is now a normal process of our educational system. Not so, really, whether or not it is in the job training functions. Generally speaking, we have a new act that came into being on the 1st of October, the Jobs Training Partnership Act. I'm proud of the fact that here in Indiana, we were successful in bringing the director of the Rehabilitation Services Agency, Wendell Walls, into full relationship with the others that had the job of implementing the Jobs Training Partnership Act. Indeed, he was a part of the small group of 5 or 6 people in our state government who was involved in working with Bob Gutman, the staff leader of the committee in Washington, of which Senator Dan Quayle was the chairman, who worked out many of the features of the Jobs Training Partnership Act. And he came to Indiana and met with our people. And I'm proud of the fact that there is evidence in the act of the need for full consideration for the handicapped in this concept of training people for the working world. Most certainly, where this commission's work comes in is to assure the fact that things of that kind do take place. And I want to thank everybody who is here this morning, as well as the leadership, for giving leadership over this 22-year period. And as we move farther and farther into this changing world, and as we see it become more dramatically a changing world, let's make certain that we provide these new and exciting opportunities to all of our people, and obviously you with a special responsibility to those that are part of this special responsibility in your normal work, as well as when you come together in a conference of this kind. And as you work during the next couple of days, work together as you do on an annual basis in this formalized way, let's remember, let's reaffirm what we all believe in, which is commitment to quality service in varying ways to those who are handicapped in our state. And let's make sure that the state of Indiana is out front in the way it approaches this. Just as I was pleased to find at this meeting in Lawrence, Kansas, and among the other Midwest states, that none others, other than Indiana, had incorporated a specific area of responsibility in the transitional mode of getting the Jobs Training Partnership Act underway for, let's say, the director of the Rehabilitation Services Agency or someone in a role akin to that, being a part of planning how we're going to do it, so as to assure the fact that training for the handicapped is included as a normal function. It's become so normal in many respects in this state that my attendance at a groundbreaking ceremony for an expansion of the Rehabilitation Agency in Vincennes some 6 weeks or 8 weeks ago reminded me so convincingly of groundbreaking ceremonies that I attend with regularity for normal industrial development activities that I scarcely saw any difference. Here was a typical workshop doing important work and worthwhile work and providing meaningful work for handicapped people. And having done well enough, there was a need to expand by 100% approximately the square footage of the operation. And the assemblage there and the field beside the building bore every resemblance to that of countless similar examples that I can think of that I've been to where there's been an industry that has come to the state, about to build a building, or it's an expansion of an existing industry, and the community leadership is assembled, people from the Chamber of Commerce, the political leadership of the community, and that this was an almost exact duplicate of all of those kinds of activities, which tells me that that enterprise in Vincennes is very much a part of today's world, providing work for those that seek it, and specialized work for those that need some specialized opportunity. I think it's important that we match our effort with our dollars. And I'm proud of the fact that for the first time, all of the federal dollars allocated for Indiana for vocational rehabilitation will be employed. In other words, the state has fulfilled its responsibilities in terms of funding as well as an operational function. I think it's important that we provide opportunity without bureaucracy. And I'm pleased that we are doing this. We're doing this in a number of different kinds of ways. For example, some may not know that we are experimenting a bit in the interrelationship that properly takes place between the Rehabilitation Services Agency and the Department of Mental Health to provide a one-stop delivery system in 2 communities in the state, Columbus and Anderson. And we're hoping that the information that we gain from this experimental program will make it possible for us to develop a new statewide service delivery system, which we'd like to think that we can start as early as next summer. I cite this simply because in many respects, the elimination of barriers, which are often referred to as turf, can become a means by which opportunity is made available for people that just simply doesn't happen for no other reason than the unfortunate characteristic and a bureaucracy of turf oftentimes preempting the service that ought to be provided. We have started in on providing some funds for respite care. This is something, as you all know, is so necessary in order for the families of those who are handicapped to maintain a home environment for those folks and at the same time be able to move out from under on a temporary basis for the relief that is so necessary. The personal satisfaction of being able to maintain a home for a handicapped child, son or daughter, and at the same time have a few moments of removal from the scene. I'm proud of the fact that we have now dedicated the 100th home residential circumstance part of our long-range program to expand on these kinds of living options for the mentally retarded. It is a regular part of our program, not often as singled out for recognition as it should be. As it is a requirement that there be a substantial give and take among a lot of people in order for that sort of thing to take place. And it is the sort of thing that I believe needs the proper kind of recognition to which it is entitled. I have a meeting this afternoon with the Health Facilities Council. It's gotten a considerable amount of publicity, but it is designed to make sure that nursing home regulations will be handled in a way that will provide for the highest possible quality care at an expense that both state government and individual families can bear. And that simple statement seems to be often unfortunately lost in some of the furor that goes on in what is not very easy give and take that has ensued for the last several months. I'm hopeful, however, that by bringing various of the parties together and hearing what I have to say about it, that we can move forward with progress rather than be hung up with the kind of difficulties that have surfaced. Lastly, let me make the mention that there's a never-ending need for us all to assure the access to public accommodations to such buildings as are open to the public for fee, to assure the fact that disabled citizens can have access at will. Now, those are a listing of some of the things that now are part of the regular, normal scene of everything. Still problems, still some barriers to assuring equal opportunity for the handicapped, but we have made great progress. And I would want to have everyone understand that I'm committed to continuing progress. We have lost someone who has kept that ever more at the forefront. Reverend Lauterbach made that point quite clear in referring to a comment made by Senator Garten, who was a longtime colleague of Senator Bosma, when he indicated that Charlie Bosma was to a very large degree the conscience of the Senate. I had the good fortune of entering the Senate the same year that Charlie Bosma did. He had, however, served previously in the House of Representatives, so he had experience that he gained from that opportunity that I did not have. And as a result, there were many instances when I sought his counsel and advice and assistance, and it was my genuine fortune that the two of us served as freshmen in the Senate, on the Senate Finance Committee, and specifically in the Budget Subcommittee of Senate Finance. So there are a limited number of people. There were 5 on that subcommittee, one of whom seldom attended the meetings. And so there were really 4 of us that participated on a full-blown basis. And you get to know someone very well indeed in a limited period of time in that kind of intimate environment, where you're hammering out decisions on an hourly basis at the most difficult time. I learned to respect Charlie Bosma very quickly. I had opportunity to function with him for 4 years in the Senate, 8 years as lieutenant governor, watching him handle legislation on the floor of the Senate. One of those things that wasn't mentioned by Reverend Lauterbach, and I think needs to be added as an ingredient to Charlie Bosma's character, one of those things that all of us remember him for, and that was his great sense of humor. I happen to be one of those that believes that our Lord also had a sense of humor. I think he understood the foibles of human nature in an unusual way, which comes out in many of those narratives that we all know so well. But there isn't any question that Charlie enjoyed those things that were funny, things that evidenced the oddities of human beings and their relationship one with another, and he used that in a very poor way in many instances to gain a point or to bring somebody along who might be somewhat recalcitrant in wanting to support a piece of legislation that he felt strongly about. It says to me that all of us can benefit by remembering Charlie Bosma and the characteristics that have already been outlined. But I'd like to think also, and particularly the kind of job that many of us have, if we allow ourselves to forget that humor is a part of life, we may not accomplish as much as we could. And sure, there are things that each of us do that we know are dumb or stupid or something else, but if we have the ability to laugh about it, as Charlie Bosma did, I think it is balm to some of the difficulties that we all incur in our lives. I add that only because I have strong belief that one of the reasons that Charlie Bosma is loved by so many people and will be missed by so many people is just simply that he was such a great human being in every sense of the word. I am a better person for having known him and worked with him over the years, and that hearty laugh of his, that great enthusiasm which he always demonstrated for those things in which he strongly believed, and the commitment and conviction which he so clearly demonstrated, sometimes for difficult circumstances, and sometimes with those kinds of programs that we engage in public life, which are controversial. There's no question that he was the kind of individual we most definitely need in our governmental scene, in life in general. But we need more of it in the halls of the legislature, more of it in government generally. And I would hope that we can all remember him as we move along in life for the great citizen that he was and for the great human being that he was. It's my genuine pleasure to ask Brian, am I supposed to do this myself? All right, thank you. I am privileged indeed to have an opportunity to provide this award, and it is the handicapped citizens of the state of Indiana. Come on up here, Brian. Acknowledge State Senator Charles E. Bosma as an outstanding person and the recognized standard bearer for disabled persons. We acknowledge his deep commitment to human rights and the dignity, warmth, compassion, and strength he displayed in all aspects of public life. We are all eternally grateful for his contribution to mankind. This memorial is presented by the Indiana State Commission for the Handicapped, October 13, 1983. As Brian Mark, he said she's off visiting one of his sisters in Maryland, and I would hazard a guess that, difficult as life may be at the moment for Marge Bosma, that she will continue to be able to hold her head high, just simply because, having been married to Charlie for all those years, she would want to do so out of respect for her dear husband. And I think all the rest of us feel very much the same way. And will you please convey our best regards to her, and with great pride, give you that award. I'm sure you will.
Thank you, Governor Orr. On behalf of my family and myself, I'd like to thank the Commission and this conference for recognizing my father this morning. During the last 5 weeks, I've learned a great deal about the person that I've called Dad for so long. A lot of it's come from hearing individuals talk about it, but I think the greatest portion of it has come from trying to help my mother sort through his many personal papers and try to get his library organized. A good deal of that paper, I might add, has come from this commission, a couple of boxes. And, but in going through this material, I came across a book that my father had referred to quite frequently, titled The Speaker's Desk Book. And there was a single slip of paper in the middle of that book. And I opened it up, and my father had placed some penciled-in stars around one quote. And I read the start and immediately recognized it. It was a statement that he had made many times, usually in graduation speeches, to try to motivate high school or grade school graduates on to bigger and better things. And that quote started out with the statement, "America, it has been said, is a nation of volunteers." I thought about that for a moment, and I realized that my father probably never thought how much his life exemplified the truth of that statement. He had volunteered for many things throughout his entire life. He'd been a lifetime volunteer for his church and his ward. He volunteered to defend his country when he thought that was necessary. He volunteered to help his community through community groups, civic activities, and he volunteered to serve his state by serving as an elected official. In that last capacity, I feel that he volunteered to defend the rights of the handicapped, the indigent, and others most fortunate or less fortunate than himself and the majority of us. And it is for this last volunteering that I feel that this commission and this conference has chosen to acknowledge his work. There's no one here that wishes more than I that he was here to accept this award for himself. But in his absence, all I can say is that for myself and for my family, I deeply appreciate this recognition and the work that he so deeply done. Thank you. We do appreciate the support. Thank you. We're talking this morning about technology and disabled persons. And I'd like to come up and say that the technology is rapidly marching forward, is going to be solving all the problems we've been facing, etc. But I'm not only going to say that technology is only a tool and very limited in terms of its overall impact, although it does provide a very important role, but I'm also going to say that it's a double-edged sword. With the same advances in technology which are promising new functions and new efficiency for individuals with disabilities that can increase their independence, that can lower the cost of independent living, and also increase the employment opportunities, can also increase the disadvantage that an individual with a disability will find as they go out into the world.
So when we look at technology, it's very important that we first of all recognize its role and its opportunities, also its limitations and its proper application. At the same time, we need to also be aware of some of the ways that advances in technology can further hamper the opportunities of handicapped individuals. And this is important because it need not. Just as, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, just as some of the advances in transportation, etc., have been able to, and can increase the mobility of handicapped individuals, they can also decrease the ability for the handicapped individual to be able to stay out with individuals who do not have handicaps. This widening gap can be overcome, however, if we detect it early and we build in the proper measures as we go along. So let's take a look this morning at some of the avenues and some of the places where technology can increase the opportunities for individuals who have a disability. And then we'll look at some of the places where we need to be aware of perhaps dangers of widening gaps, and places where we need to begin to address some of our attention now if we're to be able to avoid the growing of these gaps or the widening of these gaps over time. First of all, let's look at the good side. Technology, mobility, of course, we've seen things like power wheelchairs. We've also seen a number of non-power mobility devices. A lot of times we think of technology purely in the form of electronics. We're now in the electronics age, the information age. And so we tend to equate technology with electronics. We're finding, however, that technology is in many other areas. There are many non-electrical technologies and materials, etc., that are making a large difference. We're also finding more recent work looking in some of the biological areas that may have impact. More recent work in the electronic biological technology areas, however, are looking toward a future where we may even be able to restore some types of ambulation for some individuals. Communication, and that's really my core area. We now have aids and techniques which can allow individuals who previously were totally unable to communicate to be able to have a means of communication. As a matter of fact, at this point, there is not anyone that we've been able to find who is so severely physically handicapped that they cannot be provided with some mechanism for communicating completely independently. All right? If there is an individual and you say, well, they are almost totally disabled, but I can still tell that they're in there. However it is that you can tell that they're in there, it can be tapped, and a mechanism for communication can be found. One individual, for example, called into a hospital, and the individual had been walking along one day and all of a sudden just collapsed. And with a injury in the brainstem that had totally cut him off. He was unable to move anything but his eyes, and he was able to move them up and down a little bit, back and forth even less. That was the only movement in his body. 7 months later, he was still in the hospital, and his wife came every day and would sit there, and that's all she could do, because that's all he could do, and they'd try and ask him yes or no questions. Very simple techniques. A pad of paper, for example, and wrote the alphabet out, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and held it up, and I just said, can you see this? If you can, just move your eye. So he moved his eye, and I said, okay, do you have something you'd like to say? And if you do, just move your eye. So he moved his eye, and I said, okay, can you see this? Yes. Is the letter of the first word here? 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 Look up. I said, okay, is it this letter? Is it this letter? Is it this letter? And you look up again. And I said, okay. G. And we continued on in that way. And he spelled out, guess what? After 7 months, his first message was, does this mean I pass? And I stopped, and I wrote it down, I looked at it, and I said, does this mean you pass? And then all of a sudden, of course, think back. We tend to look at things always from our perspective, rather than from the other side. And it's really, one of the most important things I found is that in order to try and really work with and help individuals who have a disability, you have to try and get into their position. So I just sort of swung around the other side. Here's an individual who's been sitting here. Of course, he hears and knows everything that's going on. As a matter of fact, one young lad said, if you ever want to know the entire dirty history of a family, ask the handicapped son or daughter. Because, especially if they're non-vocal, everybody assumes if you can't talk, that you're either safe or else that you can't hear. And so everything goes on. It's there. Well, the individual is there, and basically they're all about this person coming, and the doctors and nurses, of course, talking about his case back and forth in front of him, the whole works. And the whole question was, if you can pass this test that this person flying in was going to give, then some type of communication aid could be provided for him. And so his first question, after all this time, never having been able to say a thing, complete sentence, of course, he was fully cognitively there, was, does this mean that I pass? And the answer, of course, was, of course, I knew that before I came, that you would pass. The question was not would you be able to have some mechanism for communication, but how fast would we be able to get you communicating depending upon what their skill levels were. That individual, I left, and the individual was, the next day, moved off of the critical care ward and onto a standard ward. His wife began to be able to take him home on weekends. And the whole thing up to then, and he'd never been out or anywhere in the entire time since the disability record. He never talked to anybody in the entire time. You mentioned the questions and fears and things that you have, and it's just a matter of not knowing. Again, it was made the point earlier that it's not what can be done today, it's knowing about what can be done. Information is really the most devastating problem we have right now. How do we get the information to people about these proper strategies? She was able to take him home now because before, if something went wrong, if he was in pain, if something, there was no way for her to know that anything was wrong. He was medically stable, so she's able to take him home and begin to get him going. He again moved on to another one. And as I understood it, he went through 3 pads of paper on the first weekend, entire pads of paper, of people writing down all of his messages and things like this. Of course, very quickly, the next problem we run into is we've got this very verbal individual who's trying to get all this stuff out, trying to communicate, and we've got 2 problems. One is that it's slow. Okay? If I were
This award is the Distinguished Service Award. This award is presented annually to a professional person who has made an outstanding contribution to handicapped persons through professional responsibilities. This year's winner is Mrs. Genevieve Riley of Indianapolis, Indiana. Mrs. Riley currently serves as the Executive Director of the Indiana Protection and Advocacy Service Commission, a position she has held since the agency was created by the Indiana General Assembly in 1977. Mrs. Riley has devoted her life to service to the vulnerable and powerless citizens of the state of Indiana. Some of you probably remember when she worked at the Mental Health Association in Indiana Incorporated. It was evident at that time that her devotion, hard work, and effective leadership made a major impact on the lives of the mentally ill. Later on, Mrs. Riley was employed as a planner at the Community Service Council of the Metropolitan Indianapolis. During this period, she chaired the task force that was responsible for pulling together the planning effort for mentally retarded, developmentally disabled individuals in central Indiana. Her duties consisted of planning, prioritizing, and evaluating programs. She had the unenviable task of counseling, cajoling, or otherwise urging executive directors of ARC to participate in the planning process. Stephen Hinkle, an ARC executive director from Fort Wayne, states that if it was not for Mrs. Riley, the quality of planning effort for services to the mentally retarded people would have been substantially diminished. In 1977, the governor wisely chose Mrs. Riley, the executive director of the newly created Protection and Advocacy Commission for the Developmentally Disabled. She has served the commission during the critical years of development of a service that has protected the lives of hundreds of developmentally disabled persons in the state of Indiana. Mrs. Riley has led, trained, counseled many, many people. Many of these people are in leadership roles in the mental health system. She has provided the basics Through her efforts, the lives of many people have been enhanced. Some of the people are the clients being served throughout the MRDD agencies in the state of Indiana. Others are working in the system, trying to emulate Mrs. Riley. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner of the Distinguished Service Award, Mrs. Genevieve Riley. One more, I think. Jim wants one.
Thank you.
Came to realize that the technology that was available then was not being applied to the needs of these people. It was at that point that I met Ed Prentke, who was an engineer at the hospital. And the two of us started to do some things on the side, and it eventually got out of hand, and here we are today. The devices we came up with at that time were embarrassingly crude by today's standards, and I'm not really going to dwell on that or on the time between, but we're going to jump to the present. Today, there is an awesome abundance of technology available for people with various degrees of handicap. As never before, these people are able to successfully pursue educational, vocational, and leisure time goals. A number of the examples of high technology that's being used today are probably available up in your exhibit areas. I haven't been able to look at the exhibit yet myself, but I'm planning to spend some time this afternoon. Certainly some areas that you would be familiar with. Kurzweil reading machine. There are libraries now that a blind person can enter and take a book and send it onto a machine, and that machine will read to the person. Mobility. There has been lots of improvement in the mobility area, both in structures and in controls of mobility systems. The computer is having a great impact on people with physical impairment today. The value of many more severely physically handicapped people to our society is obviously not in their physical capabilities, but these people do have contributions to make. They can think as well as anyone else, and this is a good place. The computer area is a good place for those people to be competitive with everyone else. Seating systems for severely physically handicapped people have come along in the last few years. There's been some Rehabilitation Engineering Center funding go into that area. And prosthetic and orthotic systems have really advanced. I have some slides that I'd like to show. Michael, if we can power on things there.
Is there any chance you can see that from here? Well, let me just pan around.
Carrie's getting some lights. It will transform an image, black and white image, or in the case of what you see here, a video display on the terminal, it will transform that to a raised profile of dots that vibrate, so that essentially a person is able to feel what is printed or displayed. Next slide, Michael. I'd like to share with you a couple of the clients of ours that have been particularly interesting from my standpoint. In our own field of electronic communication systems for non-speaking people, we are at a point well beyond the dreams of years ago. People severely involved with cerebral palsy or latter stages of ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, for example, are able to express themselves today with increasing effectiveness. Sometimes, however, the standard technology doesn't do just what is needed. Modifications are necessary to better suit the needs and capabilities of the users. I have two clients I'd like to share with you. This first one, his name is Lake Kissick, and he was in Findlay, Ohio when I first met him. His parents brought him to us. He's now mid-30s, and he was using this communication system when we first met. Lake has cerebral palsy from birth, and his communication, because he has no speech, his communication consists of using this head pointer and that lap tray or communication board was mounted on his wheelchair so that he would point from one location to another for his communication needs. He had letters of the alphabet, and under those letters were lists of words. So if he had the word that he wished to indicate, to communicate, he would just point to it and wait until somebody would respond or recognize that that's where he was pointing. And if the word was not there, he would have to spell out one letter at a time. He was being supported by vocational rehabilitation in the state of Ohio, and had interest in pursuing accounting and bookkeeping. Obviously, he was not able to use pencil and paper the way most accountants and bookkeepers would, and so we needed to come up with something that would be helpful to him. The system that was put together, next slide, Michael. We started out with a communication aid for him that would handle his communication needs. This was several years ago now. This is the time that we were first starting to use the microprocessors in communication systems, and trying to work around his interest in the bookkeeping and accounting area. We put together a system that would store various accounting forms in his communication system so that he could access one location on his communication board, and his video display would be erased, and the accounts receivable form or an accounts payable form or a general ledger form would be brought up on the display. Then he could make any changes in that, fill in the blanks, put in the numbers, and once he got it the way he would like to have it, he would have that printed out on a sheet of paper. So we put together that system for him. Also, we were just developing the optical head pointer at that point. This was an original development out of the University of Tennessee Rehabilitation Engineering Center in Memphis. And when we found that Lake was able to use that, he was elated, as shown in the next slide. He was really excited. So we put together a system for him, and this fellow was not dull by any means. He recognized that while we had some standard vocabulary in the communication system, but lots of capability that he could develop his own vocabulary also, we provided for his special forms, and when he recognized we could do that, he said, by way of his typewriter and head stick, he looked at us and said, I would rather not have some of the standard words in that system that you've already provided. And we had words like teacher and school, hospital, wheelchair, mother, father, brother, sister. As I look back now, several years later, it was really stupid words that we had in there, but we didn't know then. And likewise, we don't know how stupid we are today until a few years in the future. But we had a system that was useful for most people. Now, when he asked us to make some changes, he'd already had a lot of life experiences, and he had his own vocabulary that he was really interested in using. So he wrote back and said, can you put in some different ones? And if I can remember a few of them, we put in 16 special vocabulary units for him. One of them was, I stick out my tongue for yes and shake head for no. One was, you must have questions you want to ask. Please use your own judgment. He did some writing, and he had in there, this is from the writings of, and then he continued from there. I have my own business was another one. And, oh, the one that I really like is, this is like one of the metaphysical positions defended by, and he would continue with that. So, not an adult person at all. Next slide will get us a little further up to date. This was taken just recently at Minneapolis, Minnesota. There was a Computers and the Disabled meeting up there within the last couple of months. And as a result of having his first communication system, Lake was able to move from his home in Findlay, Ohio, to Minneapolis, where he could participate in programs at the Courage Center. And he is now living on his own in his own apartment. He has an Apple IIe computer, and I'll have a slide of that shortly. The exhibit, he helped us with that by demonstrating our latest communication system, and here he's being interviewed by local television people. So he's quite an effective user of communication systems and technical aids in general. The next slide shows in his apartment his Apple IIe computer and his communication system that he uses there. And next slide shows the head stick that he's presently using on his Apple computer, and we will shortly have an interface that will connect between the communication system that he has and the computer, so that he won't have to use one letter at a time head stick pointing on the keyboard. He'll be able to use the faster optical head pointing on the Express One. Okay, next slide shows another fellow. This is Randy Reed, and similarly, his parents brought him to us. He also has cerebral palsy from birth, and no speech. Much better pointing skills than Lake Kissick, because he is able to move his hands around a bit. But for Randy, there was an additional complication, and that was that he was totally blind. He was not able to use the scanning and visual contact communication systems that we used with most other people. When Randy came to us, it was with the system that you see here, which is a raised foam letters lapboard on his wheelchair. And by his proprioceptive movements, if you close your eyes, you know about where the end of your hand is. He could locate the letter fairly closely, and then he would confirm the particular letter by feeling it. So he would spell one letter at a time by finding the letter and waiting until somebody would respond that that's the letter that he's indicating. So likewise, his parents wanted to come up with a system that would provide much more independence for him. And recognizing that he was proficient at this system, and also that there's a fair amount of magnitude to the task of teaching a person who is blind to communicate with a new system, we wanted to retain as much of this as we could. So the next slide shows what we came up with on that. It was a large, we worked with his father on the fabrication of the enclosure. And what we proposed is that we would take and add a push button under each of the letters on his communication system. So he would locate the letter in the same manner that he had done before, but then he'd drop his finger off the bottom edge of the letter and push a button. And that system worked well for Randy, and it's looks as though it's going to continue to work for him. There are some new approaches that I think we would use today if we had that to do over again with some of the speech synthesis technology. As with technology in other areas, the people who work with this technology are engineers. As a result, the rehabilitation engineer has entered our society. In medical centers, the engineer has joined the traditional members of the rehabilitation team. We also see rehab engineers employed by school systems, service agencies, and businesses. In North Carolina, 4 engineers employed by the state assist rehabilitation counselors in cases where technology can benefit clients. As one of them says, you can't counsel someone up a flight of stairs. I'm aware of 3 rehabilitation engineering service programs operating here in Indiana. Some of this information just came to me within the last few days as I was doing some research for coming here. Typically, these centers provide information, assistance in selection of technical aids, modification or custom fabrication services, and installation assistance. All 3 use a multidisciplinary team approach. One program is called Aspire, AIDS and Service Program involving rehabilitation engineering, and I think that you had an opportunity to hear about that this morning. Second program is ADRC, the Assistive Device Resource Center. This program is based in South Bend Memorial Hospital and is funded by a 4-year grant from Indiana Rehabilitation Services. This group is only 3 months old and offers access to AbleData, a computer-based technical aid information service. ADRC has an exhibit here right outside this room, so I hope that you'll have an opportunity to meet the people there and see what they're able to offer you. The third program of which I'm aware is the Rehabilitation Engineering Clinic at Indiana Purdue University at Fort Wayne. This largely volunteer program began in May of this year and is a cooperative effort of the university and the Allen County Society for Crippled Children and Adults. And there's some folks from there here today also. Other Indiana activities include work being done in the application of computers at Anderson Public Schools and Porter County Schools. The Special Education Department at Purdue, in addition to the research that they're doing, maintains an assortment of technical aids for potential clients to try. I'm sure that there are other activities of which I'm not aware, but even those that I've mentioned, they add up to an impressive resource available to the people of Indiana. I hope you'll become familiar with those and find out what they can do for you. The federal government has made significant contributions to this field. Some of the earliest work that I recall was that done by engineers at the Veterans Administration Prosthetic Center in New York. Today, the VA Rehabilitation Research and Development Program is alive and well. The National Institute for Handicapped Research, also in Washington, provides funding for a network of rehabilitation engineering centers. Centers are based in academic medical center settings and work in various core areas. These cores presently include nonverbal communication, quantification of human performance, aids for deaf and hearing impaired, improved wheelchair systems and specialized seating, functional electrical stimulation, access to communication control and computers, prosthetics and orthotics, stimulation of industry, worksite modifications, sensory aids for blind and deaf, transportation, and low back pain. Leaders in these fields have been instrumental in organizing those of us in the field into a closely knit but rapidly growing community. Next slide, please. RESNA, the Rehabilitation Engineering Society of North America, was formed just a few years ago. It is a multidisciplinary organization of people interested in the application of technology to help people with handicaps. Rehabilitation counselors, special educators, physicians, advocates, and users of technical aids. The annual RESNA meeting is an exciting event with never enough time to attend all the workshops, paper presentations, product demonstrations, technical exhibits, and other activities. I urge any of you who are so inclined to investigate membership. I have some information with me for any of you who would be interested to contact me afterwards. Other federal agencies are recognizing the importance of this work and are providing funding to support it. My own organization has had two recent experiences to support this. Last year, we received funding through the National Science Foundation Small Business Innovative Research Program for a feasibility study on a modular communication and control system. We have applied for phase 2 funding to actually perform the research. Next slide. We were also recently awarded a contract by the United States Department of Education to assemble, evaluate, and prepare a marketing plan for a system technology that would be of value in the classroom for students grades K through 12. The system we are proposing is shown here. Probably many of you aren't going to get much from that, but what's shown on the left is a powered wheelchair. What we are proposing is that a person who's using a communication system has many needs beyond communication. Communication is the most important need, but it's not the only need. And what we're seeing is that occasionally people are provided with communication systems that don't provide for addressing the other needs. People look at only the communication need and use up all or a good part of the capability that the person has to operate the communication system. So what we're proposing here is that the communication system can be the core element of a larger system. And the system can include mobility control with a simulator to simulate a joystick going between the communication system and the standard powered wheelchair. There also can be a telemetry system that would permit the user of the communication system to transmit data wireless to either a keyboard emulator attached to a computer or to an environmental control system so that the user of the system can operate various electrical devices in surroundings. So we're just in the process of putting this system together now. The University of Tennessee in Memphis is going to be doing the evaluation, and then we're going to be preparing a marketing plan, including a film to demonstrate that. Another area of research with which we've been associated is the development of MinSpeak. The next slide introduces that. Yes, MinSpeak is a linguistic-based expressive communication system that depends on computer technology for implementation. There are a number of other symbol-oriented communication systems already available, but they are all systems that were developed rather separate from technology. And this system requires good technology to be able to function. Next slide. Here, if a person is presented with an array of symbols, and these symbols would have to be chosen with the life experiences of the user in mind, the idea is that a person who needs to be able to communicate can communicate the majority of his daily living communication needs with a relatively small number of carefully chosen fixed sentences. And then this system becomes the way that that person draws these sentences out of his computer-based device. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. What happens here is that the information that's contained in the sentence is summarized by a sequence of concepts. And the person who's using the system then selects those concepts in sequence. Next slide. There are all sorts of approaches with this thing. It's been an interesting experience for me to work with a linguist. I hope that I don't offend any of you out there, but linguists are, engineers are also a little different. But from an engineering standpoint, linguists are a lot different. Now, I'm sure that from the linguist standpoint, the engineers are a lot different too. But Bruce Baker is a linguist, and he's the fellow who came up with this basic idea. And he came to us with this, and after much discussion, we finally were able to communicate with each other, and then we've been able to make some progress on this idea. With the two elephants there, they could be in a parade. Many concepts could be related to that symbol. One is that one thing follows another. The concept of large or huge could be there. The concept of confusion, because you would relate confusion with the circus and the elephants with the circus. Gray, peanuts, all sorts of things that you could relate to that symbol of a couple of elephants. And one of the things we're trying to do now is to put together an objective approach, an approach that a person could be using to find out what kinds of symbols represent the concepts that he's going to be needing. But I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how this system would work. Next slide. Assume that a person would select the apple. Then he has told the machine that he is going to be eating. And all of us have eaten. Most of us are able to feed ourselves. There are a few people who need assistance in the eating process. So what you'd like to be able to do if you can't speak is be able to communicate information relative to the eating process to someone else quickly and effectively, which does not mean spelling things one letter at a time. That just takes too long. Next slide shows a volt symbol. And the volt, or the lightning bolt, should be the concept of speed. Now, if a person selects that one location, the machine, what his communication aid would say is, "You're giving me the food too fast." Next slide is the skull. And if the person who's feeding the other person doesn't respond, this may be the next thing that would be appropriate. It would say, "I'm choking." And you can see that if you have to spell out "I'm choking" one letter at a time, it may not ever get all spelled out. Next slide shows dressing. And by selecting this one location, after telling the machine that you're eating, selecting this one location, the machine would say, "Be careful, food is getting on my clothes." And there are days when you don't want food on your clothes. And there are days when maybe it's okay if some food gets on your clothes. But the next slide will give us a sunshine. If the person precedes the clothes with the sunshine, then the machine would say, "It's okay if some food gets on my clothes." So by making a very small number of selections, we have a lot of information coming out of this communication device. Next slide. With all the research ongoing in this field, the future indeed looks bright. Almost daily we learn of new devices and techniques that can be expected in the future. Change is occurring at an ever-increasing rate. This fast rate of change, and the acknowledgement of that is my first concern. There is a tendency to delay taking action on the selection of a technical aid because the future promises something better than what is available today. I guarantee you that if you can make that argument today, if you wait to some point in the future, you're going to be able to make that argument much better than you can make it today. And what will happen if you continue with that process is that the client will die before you ever really take action. The solution is to satisfy today's needs with today's technology. You have to look at what's available today, use that technology to the best that you can use it. Delaying does not generally serve the client's best interest. However, when evaluating alternatives, it's a good idea to consider what new technology is going to be coming along and to try to select technology that's available today that can be adapted and updated. Do not be misled into thinking that a technical aid is the solution to a problem. And that the higher the technology, the better the solution. It just doesn't work that way. The technical aid is only a component of the solution. Frequently, the solution requires much time and effort on the part of the rehabilitation professionals, local technology provider, the family members, and the user. Also, the highest technology is not always the best approach. In the face of many high-tech, expressive communication aids, I have more than one friend who finds that the most effective system for him is a head pointer and a no-tech vocabulary board, the kind of system that Leigh Kissick was using when we first met. I will obviously consider it a measure of accomplishment when we're able to come up with a technical aid that will be an acceptable substitute. And when I do, my friends better not throw out the old system. They will still need it when the technical aid fails. Last night, I took my family out to eat in Worcester, Ohio, and part of this was the occasion of celebrating an accomplishment of our third grade daughter, and consequently she had the opportunity to select where we were going to eat. And she selected the Chinese restaurant. And we were pleased. Obviously, the occasion that we were celebrating merited more than the trip to McDonald's, which we frequently have. And we were pleased also to have her culinary interests moving toward something a little more sophisticated. And happy to have her developing an interest in fine Oriental cuisine. About halfway through her cheeseburger, she asked about the cookies that tell your fortune. And so obviously that was one of the big attractions for her. So we assured her that the cookies would be coming later. And at the end of the meal, sure enough, the fortune cookies did arrive. And after settling the squabbles between her and her sister on who was going to share her mother's cookie because her mother had to leave earlier, we got their cookies all straightened out. And finally, I had my own cookie to open up. And I open it up, and it says, strike while the iron is 55338. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it probably doesn't to you. If it does, I'd like to talk to you later. But it's a good indication that obviously there was some element of technology that generated that little fortune, and it needs a little attention. It doesn't always work all the time. So strike while the iron is 55338. With the increasing availability of technology in the rehabilitation arena, life is becoming better for many people. This availability is also making life much more complex. Herein lies the challenge to consumers and advocates, professionals, funding agencies, technology providers, and our society. The challenge to consumers and advocates is to find technology that meets your needs. Next slide. Find that technology, get it, and use it well. That's a tall order. Too often, items that can really help exist, but you don't know about them. There are ways to find out, however. Learn your resources, stay on top. The ABLE data system is a good approach. There are consumer publications that you should be subscribing to. Once you've found the item you need, how are you going to pay for it? In today's society, no one should have to do without an item that can have a significant impact on his life the way much of this technology can. Money is available, but you may need to hunt for it. First, look where you think it should be. If it's not there, ask questions. Don't just take no for an answer and go away. We have to educate the funding agencies. Keep looking until you've found what you need as far as the funding is concerned. After getting your technical aid, use it and use it well. Today, many people need to be educated about and convinced of the value of rehabilitation technology. This means that users who can demonstrate effective use of technical aids will help themselves and others obtain those aids in the future. The challenge to the professional, next slide, is primarily one of education. Becoming aware of and learning to appropriately select and apply technical aids. In some cases, this can be an awesome responsibility. For example, for a non-speaking person, where that person goes in life, how far he goes, what he's able to accomplish, is a direct function of how well he can communicate. The consequences of providing a person with less than the best technical aid for him can be tragic. Too often people buy a device based on price and they don't think about what the effect of that is going to be on the life of that person who's receiving the aid. Most professional associations are now addressing the need for education in the area of technology. And this is an important thing for us. We feel that where this market is going to go in the future is really a function of the education of the professional people. These are the people that make the decisions on what's going to be provided and how it's going to be provided. And those are the same people who really have to do their jobs well. And it's a difficult thing to do. Workshops, seminars, courses, and conferences are being offered for this purpose. Take advantage of them. In many cases, the selection and application of technical aids requires a multidisciplinary team approach. This may mean that rehab professionals must work together to achieve the best results for the client. Next slide. The challenge to funding agencies is to recognize the value of technical aids. A number of years ago, a relatively informal study was conducted at the Children's Hospital at Stanford Rehabilitation Engineering Center. In the survey, people with multiple impairments were asked to prioritize their needs. Generally, the results indicated that priorities fell in this order: communication, daily living tasks, and mobility. Yet this priority of need is often not reflected at all in the availability of funds for technical aids. With some agencies, the provision of a wheelchair is standard practice, while an environmental control system might be considered, but a communication aid is out of the question. At this point, I'm not asking for more rehabilitation dollars. That comes later. What I am suggesting is the priorities of our funding agencies need to be addressed. They need to better reflect the priorities of need, people who need this technology. This can be changed, but we need to get some people thinking about it in the funding agencies. As I mentioned earlier, the technical aid is often only a component in the solution to a problem. We need funding for solutions, not just funding for aids. This means allocating dollars for services provided by rehab engineers, technical aid providers, and other professionals. The challenge to providers of technical aids is to survive these early years. Next slide. The risk is high in any enterprise that is operating in this new field. A measure of maturity in a field is the ability of private enterprise to survive and thrive. In most geographic areas in the United States, survival is now possible. Durable medical equipment suppliers still often subsidize their technical aid activities, but they can see that the future looks bright. Due to the highly technical nature of these products, the DME dealer is becoming a valued and respected member of the rehab community. Next slide. My last challenge is to all of us, our society in general. We are now able to see the impact the technology can have on the lives of people with handicaps. We know the need exists. We have the technology ready. The professionals are learning how to use it properly. The missing ingredient is now the financial resources necessary to complete the picture. The investment we make in technology to help disabled people, when compared with the investment we make in technology to destroy people, does not speak well of our society. With a minuscule decrease in our defense budget, we could double our efforts in this area. We all need to look at the priorities of our society that are reflected in the federal budget. And if they are not our personal priorities, let our servants in Washington know what we want. Rehabilitation technology has not made our lives simpler for the most part, but it is making lives better. The investment we all make is large, but the return on that investment can be fantastic. It really does work. And by continuing to work together, we can see that everyone who can benefit from technology can have access to it. We are at the dawn of a new day. Let's live this day to the fullest. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. For those of you who would be interested in talking to Barry, he will be around this afternoon. He wants to see some of our own exhibits, and he'll be available to answer questions, to interact.